very, very briefly together, and then we'll come to a panel. I won't expect everyone to answer every question, but anyone who wants to make a comment on anything that's been said, if you're making a contribution that doesn't need an answer, then obviously that doesn't need to be answered there. So can I have some hands up, and we'll get some gender balance. So blue jumper, black jumper, one more. Both on that side there. And one more.
Okay. Three very quick. Sorry. Hannah Isaac, Sunderland, France. Three very quick points. The first is when the strike was on, the sick and those on holiday were counted as having crossed the picket line. I was sick, I certainly didn't cross the picket line. Secondly, when they talk about the offer that they've made, that's an offer is giving me something. They're taking it away from me. That's no offer. And thirdly, they keep talking about a 3% increase in what you're paid. It's 3% of your wages, which turns out at a 100% increase in most cases.
Yep, working. This is a question mainly for James Medway. Thank you for an excellent speech. I think the choice about Greece is a choice that might have to be made about Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and who knows, maybe eventually Britain. And so it's a very important one. Is it better for us, the ordinary people, if the currency, if the government is allowed to default? And what are the consequences of that default? Firstly, for the people in the country where the default is happening, but secondly for the people in the rest of Europe. And I would ask you to try and analyse that, if you possibly can, in a nutshell. I appreciate it's a very complicated issue. In terms of the potential sort of risk that the banks will collapse like a pack of cards, as far as you said, you know, the French and Italian banks holding a lot of Greek debt, insofar as the governments are already putting masses of bailout money into the European facility and the European Bank, and insofar as there are interlocking central bank debts which go all the way back to us, the taxpayer. Thank you very much.
They've been fantastic contributions. Anybody else? If you start rounding a little bit, I'll do this, that means wind up, and then when I do that, then you can cut off the sound, right? I'm not being rude, it's just to speed things up, but that was absolutely perfect lengths. And who was next?
Jonathan Clapworthy, Liverpool. Just two brief comments. One is, my mother was Greek, she just died a few months ago. She's spent the Second World War with a German officer stationed in her house. There are many Greeks who still remember when the Germans came. And I don't think you need to be a racist to appreciate the significance of the present situation. The second point is, in 1975, the British government took out a loan from the International Monetary Fund, and as one of the conditions, it abandoned its income policy. Since then, the wealth in this country has polarised, with the rich getting richer at the expense of everybody else. Given that that has just carried on, and given that the situation, the extreme polarisation of wealth now, has been internationalised, how can we go about reversing that trend, redistributing wealth, and cancelling debts in the international situation?
That's lovely. I'm actually going to go for another couple of questions. Can we have anyone over this side of the room? One, two, three. We'll go for the whole because they're quite succinct questions.
I'm Gerald Party from Stroud District Green Party. I just wanted to back up what the final speaker had said. Some people may have read in the news about the judicial review that took place about the health services in Gloucestershire, which was a judicial review brought about by cooperation between Green Party, Labour Party locally and the Socialist Party, working in a Stroud Against the Cuts organisation. We took the National Health people to task for trying to transfer services to a community interest company, knowing full well that at the next stage, 4 years later, they would downright lose it to Virgin, as happened with Mid-Surrey Health. So it is possible to get these campaigns together and to fight these things. And our friend here is absolutely right that the big agenda behind all of these cuts is actually to privatise everything in sight. When they finished, we'll be electing mayors who will put everything out to tender. So now's the time to dig in and fight back.
I'm Hiram Starbull from Forest and Redbridge. First point really more towards Jade, but also picking up on what Matt said. I mean, on the European context, you know, we're all focused on the Eurozone crisis, but the crisis in Europe is bigger than the Eurozone. If you look at Hungary, if you look at Latvia, if you look at Romania, if you look at Czech Republic, if you look at Slovenia, these are all countries now being subjected, irrespective of the fact that they're outside the Eurozone, all of them being subjected to the same kind of medicines. That's number one, is that we mustn't lose sight of the fact that this is not just a Eurozone issue, it's wider than Eurozone, but the same kind of medicine is being imposed on a much wider range of countries than the Eurozone. Second point is really the whole thing about how I feel that maybe we're not getting our message strong enough, and that's really, we're focusing on, if you like, defending social and family welfare. Fine, I'm all in favour of that, but I think we should also be highlighting what we've got now, which is corporate welfare, and we really should be putting together a very clear message about how we actually have a system that, in effect, is really communism for the rich, if we put it like that, effectively. And we need to get that message strongly across, and really in a simple way, because I think that is part of the message that's missing in terms of beginning to get people to understand why we're in the situation we are. And the last thing, and this is more a general question, is really, well, how do we manage to climb out of this mess? Because it is a deep hole we're in. And, you know, I mean, you can be an optimist and half glass full or whatever, but I think wherever you look at it, even if you're an optimist, you've got to be a tragic optimist in this kind of situation, because there's going to be major, major pain. Someone is going to pay, it's not just the Greeks we're talking about, but there's going to be major pain. And how do we do that on top of the fact that we, as a party, as we heard from Caroline just now, earlier on, we are supporting the idea of steady-state growth. In other words, growth will not be the solution to get out of this. That poses more challenges, and that's an issue that we need to also confront.
Thank you very much. Then I think I'm going to have to go back to the panel, and if they can make closing remarks and pick up on any of the points that they want to as closing comments.
Yeah, given that all the powers that be in Europe are following this neoliberal agenda and austerity, I'm given to understand this bloke Hollande, who's standing for the presidency in France, stands a chance of winning, and he's purportedly offering some kind of stimulus package, which may or may not set a different example in Europe. Just wonder what the panellists think about the chances of him doing that and it providing a counter-example.
What I would like to say to you is let's carry this conversation on later on. Those of you who are going to meet up at the bar tomorrow over cups of tea, when you go back to your local parties, try and make some space for this debate in your own area. And if you want to put on a public meeting, contact us. If you want some help with organising or with some speakers to send to your region or to for a bigger public discussion, whether on this specific issue or more locally, that would be entirely up to you. I'm going to go to James, Maeve and Chris then for their closing remarks. I know they have to leave at 8, but some of us can we'll meet and carry on this discussion over the rest of the conference. Thank you very much for all your contributions. Well, Emily,
well, just in response to a number of the points, I mean the first comment that was made about, I think particularly valid, about the nature of the offer. It's interesting that in one of the negotiations hosted by the TUC, Francis Moore leant across the table to Mark Solotka and actually said to him, if you want to make any real progress in future negotiations, I expect you to remove your pensions calculator off the PCS website. Now, the pensions calculator, a classic example of how the truth can be subversive, simply allows people to feed in information about your service and pay scales and calculates exactly how much you're going to lose. And from a PCS member's perspective, on average, you're going to lose £60 a month. That's equivalent to 1 day's pay per month for the rest of your working life. And that's the reality. And that's why I think a lot of public sector workers have supported the action, because as you rightly say, it is a blatant attack on people's living standards. Before you even factor in the impact of inflation, depending on which measure you use, and the impact that has on, in a context of a pay freeze, how that obviously has an impact on living standards. Now, I think a lot of the questions, I mean, what comes out really is that there is the need and the space for a much wider discussion about what, to use the phrase, about what sort of world. How do we generate a more equal society? I mean, ideas about a more progressive tax system, about tax justice, about collecting the taxes of the rich, about a Robin Hood tax, about redistribution. But I also think it opens up a much wider question about alternatives to corporate power, about discussions not about the monolithic command and control concept of socialism that we've seen unfortunately in the world that has discredited socialism in the minds of many people. I'm talking about, cooperatives, democratic forms of social and public ownership. And I think we need to be talking about things like that as well, about how we exercise both regulation and we look at forms of ownership. Now, the very final point, it comes back, can we win? And, an example about local campaigning, where people operate in a genuinely collective way, that we put aside, as somebody once said, the narcissism of small differences that particularly afflicts the left. The Life of Brian syndrome. The idea that people, let's focus on the things that unite us. And if we can't do that now, when can we ever do that? And I think there is a massive amount that people are agreed upon and can build that much wider movement. Just a couple of examples from a PCS perspective. We organise, as I mentioned, in the commercial sector, and we're now dealing with some anti-union companies, effectively, that all those hovering on the outskirts that are already winning a number of government contracts. We ran a pay campaign in Capita, and what was interesting about that, first of all, they wouldn't even talk to us. It was regarded akin to mutiny, and they said, we want to talk to you about establishing the application of a UK living wage. No. We took strike action. Within 2 days of taking strike action, the chief executive contacted us and approached us, and we had a meeting, myself and the other full-time officer. We met with the chief executive of Capita, and they said, right, we're prepared to now cost the implementation of a UK living wage. But here was the interesting bit. He said, what we're worried about is that, bearing in mind we're going to be bidding for many of these government contracts, we're a little bit worried that if we pay the UK living wage, it may price us out of the tendering process. So will you give us an assurance that PCS will put the same pressure that you put on us on all of our other rivals and competitors? Now, that's the type of assurance most trade unionists like to give to companies. And just one other final example. In Hewlett-Packard, that we run campaigns and industrial action, and we stopped the offshoring. Again, it's not been in the media. They were planning to transfer to Bangalore cutting and 250 jobs in the UK and transferring the functions that involve the administration of the benefits payable to 25 million UK citizens. And they wanted to move it from the UK over to Bangalore in India. As a result of industrial action, we stopped it. And not only did we stop that, again, it's hardly received any media coverage. I mean, this is one of the biggest, most powerful economic institutions on the planet. And yet, the threat of action of our members, with the support of Unite. And what was good about that is, in the negotiations, our full-time officer was negotiating with one of the senior officials in Hewlett-Packard, who had to point out that, yes, they were prepared to now engage and they backed off from offshoring, but he pointed out that he wasn't very happy with us because he got a phone call in the dead of night from the chief executive of Hewlett-Packard in the United States, who wanted to know why articles were appearing in the San Francisco Advertiser talking about civil service unions in the UK in taking industrial action and bringing the company into disrepute and damaging the good brand name of Hewlett-Packard. And the moral of the story, I think, is what's possible when workers stick together, even against some of the major economic institutions, but also the truly global nature. And I think very much agree with those who've said this is not just confined to the UK, nor is it confined to the Eurozone. This is a global and international struggle, and that needs to be part of all of our calculations in mobilising the campaign. I suspect everybody in this room is supportive of. Thanks very much for listening.
Three, I think, direct questions there. On François Hollande, the Socialist Party candidate for President of France, he said he wants to renegotiate the fiscal compact. People remember this is what David Cameron walked out of just before Christmas last year, for completely the wrong reasons. As it happens, probably in many ways, the right thing to do. The compact basically makes austerity legally binding right the way across Europe. It means that everybody is locked into trying to run balanced budgets forevermore. Hollande wants to renegotiate that. He also has some proposals for sort of mild stimulus measures and the rest of it. Now, whether he does this or doesn't do this, I think it's slightly contingent. The previous history of French presidents elected on kind of Keynesian programs, elected to say we're going to reflate the economy, is actually not that great. The obvious example is Mitterrand, who was elected, in 1981, by 83, and entirely ditched his programme of reflation and minimum wages and all the rest of it, in favour, by the way, of essentially the exchange rate mechanism at the time, the precursor to the euro, in favour of the bond markets, in favour of neoliberalism. So we'll see what Hollande gets up to. What he gets up to, I think, will depend very much not on what he does when he's elected president, but it's what everybody else does on the streets and the workplaces. That is where the pressure on a government starts to emerge, and that, I think, is the necessary step there. So we'll see in that one. The other bit, I think, is absolutely right. Hungary, Romania, and various other Eastern European states outside of the Eurozone have been subjected. In many ways, it's been slightly under the radar for the UK for a number of reasons, but they have been subjected to pretty vicious austerity for the last couple of years. Romania is an interesting case where the biggest protests there since the fall of Ceausescu in 1989 got rid of the government on the basis of opposing austerity. In many ways, there's moments of optimism that take place outside of the Eurozone in Eastern Europe, and I think it's worth keeping an eye on this, not least because any risk of default or financial chaos or whatever that happens in Romania or Hungary immediately leaks back into the rest of the financial system. I focused on the Eurozone because this is where the tangle of state debt, of public debt, with private finance is so entrenched that the state debt that has built up inside the Eurozone as a result of the private financial crisis is itself held by other private financial institutions. So the crisis there has almost uniquely condensed character. It means that anything that goes wrong with state debt immediately feeds back into the private financial system. This was the third question. What will happen if default takes place? Is it the right thing to ask for? Well, I think for Greece, unambiguously yes at this point. I think to say that we'll just carry on destroying everything in order to try and repay a debt that essentially we can't repay is disastrous, and therefore default is the most sensible thing to do. The question at that point is default on whose terms? Because what's happening at the moment is default on the terms of the Troika. They won't call it a default. They don't want to call it a default because they don't want to trigger all the insurance against default. They want to try and contain things a bit. So they call it a voluntary restructuring. But it's a partial default to the Greek debt. It's not enough to stabilise the situation, even on their own figures, but nonetheless, that's what they're trying to achieve. But it's inside the euro, it's on the terms of the IMF, the EU and the ECB, and therefore it's a disaster for Greece to carry on going along with this. If default happens, it has to be like Argentina, it has to be debtor-led, not creditor-led, and that's the important thing, I think, to get across. Now, what are the consequences from this? Most immediately, the Greek banking system is shot to pieces. That's the reason Greece also ought to leave the euro, because if you have to recapitalise your banking system and you don't have access to basically the printing presses for the money to do that, you have to rely on the ECB very generously giving you the cash to do it. If you're still using the euro, you're completely stuffed. So of course you also have to leave the euro. And then you get the potential contagion effect, that there are still probably much larger than particularly German banks are admitting to holdings, very large holdings of Greek debt scattered throughout the rest of Europe. And then of course you get the speculation kicking in, which is that if Greece defaults, then Portugal and Spain and perhaps even Italy, although that's a whole other scale of problem, they all suddenly start to be candidates for default and for wider financial contagion. How do you deal with that? I think it's very simple. I think even the IMF has come around to this one. I think it's something the left has always argued for. You introduce capital controls, you stop people speculating, you tax the movement of capital, you freeze bank accounts that are delinquent, you close down hedge funds, you tax the rich to take the money out of these unregulated hands and put it under public control. That's how you stop financial contagion. And if any chaos happens inside the Eurozone, as of a Greek default or any other default or even a partial default, and it's entirely likely that this will happen, I think we have to make the demand loud and clear that the way we stop financial contagion, speculation destroying whole societies, is we grab our financial industries and we do what we should have done years ago, which is impose the strictest possible controls on how they trade their money, how they speculate and how much tax they pay. Final thing on corporate welfare. Absolutely right to say this. The figures are stark. They're straight out of, well, the University of Manchester, a group of researchers there, the Centre for Research in Economic and Social Change, bothered to add up how much money we actually get from financial services in this country. Over the years of the boom, 2001 to 2008, about 280 billion paid by financial services in tax over that time, which is quite a large amount of money. But the immediate cost of the bailout in 2008 was 300 billion, and the total amount of support offered to the banks was 1.3 trillion pounds. So this doesn't add up in any sense. The fact that we bailed out the banks means that this is an immense cost for us, and we do not get more money back from them in terms of taxes. They are corporate scroungers. They are receiving welfare on the part of the residents. And I think the more clearly we can get that message across, the better, because I am sick of this kind of complaints about you can't do anything about the banks, everybody will leave if we tax them properly, oh dear, keep on paying the bonuses. We should be saying good, we all suffer as a result of having a financial system that looks like this. So it's time to do something about it. I think we have to start to win the argument on this one. It is not good for us to have a bloated financial system. We need to get on top of it. Thank you.
I'm not an economist obviously, but what I can offer is that optimism works for students, and I think the fact that not for decades have we seen students mobilise in the way that they have in the past 2 or 3 years, and even though we're not the economists yet, we're at the front line of the fight and we're prepared to fight for it, and we know what's right, and we really do believe in an alternative. And just more importantly, the strikes and occupations and protests that open up the alternative for discussion, the what should we cut and who should pay more and who should get less, rubbish opened up a broader kind of debate upon who is responsible for the crisis, how it happened and why were we not allowed to say in it. And the engagement of students and young people might not hold the answers, but I think it paves the way for the alternative against austerity, and that's why it's so important that the trade unions now engage with young people and that the communities work with the young people now so that we can provide the fight back. So that's it.
Well, that's all we've got got time for tonight, so thank you once again to Maeve McDade, James Medway and Chris Boff. And if you'd like to put your hands in your pockets on your way out, we are going to take a core collection. Every crisp little note helps, and pound coins too, if that's all you've got left over. Anyone hungry? I'm probably going to go for a curry. Let's meet in the lounge, and this conversation carries on. Please take it back to your local parties in your regions and sign up to Coalition Resistance as an individual supporter or affiliate your group. Thank you very much. Thank you.